Hello and welcome to another... Since the last Caverns of Ixalan, I've put together a review of my top picks for Pauper Commanders for each new set. I love digging into not just the uncommon creatures, but specifically how they compare to the existing options in the format, and what common cards exist to make their abilities work or not work. This year, I've started playing a newer format, Clover, which these reviews tend to feel really relevant to since it is an uncommons-only format. As such, for a little while now, I've wanted to adapt my review videos to acknowledge this, and not just spotlight cards from the perspective of Pauper Commander, but from Clover as well. To this end, I'm dropping the title of Pauper Commander Review. Now, if you're coming from a perspective of Pauper Commander or Clover, I hope you can find this and future videos in the series helpful. Now, I'm still going to be talking about how cards specifically function in Pauper Commander, so it's important to know how it works. If you don't know that format, it is a variant of Commander where you have 99 commons in your deck and one uncommon creature in the command zone, no need for it to be legendary or not. Clover, on the other hand, is a 60-card format made of only uncommons. The commander is still a legendary creature, but you do get to spotlight any one other card in your deck if it is mana value 3 or greater, by making it the Lucky Clover, where you get to run 4 copies of. In this way, both formats feel like they really benefit from digging into the uncommon creatures. Clover, more so if they are legends or are mana value 3 or greater, but either way, I feel like it makes for a relevant discussion. As an aside, your Lucky Clover does not need to be a creature. That's just the framing of this video as a whole. With all that said, let's jump into my top uncommon creatures from The Hobbit. Number 10, Dane, Lord of the Iron Hills. Dane is a 2-mana white 2/2 dwarf noble with vigilance. They have storied, and as long as you have an enduring story, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. Storied is a new mechanic from the set, which says if you have 3 or more artifacts, legendaries, or sagas, you gain an enduring story that lasts for the rest of the game, even if later in the game you dip below that requirement of 3 artifacts, legendaries, and or sagas. As for the ability itself, this is one of those cards that doesn't push you in a new direction. It's just a nice way of dissuading attackers in the early and mid game when people are not willing to pay that mana. Now, you do have a little bit of deck building requirements in that you have to make sure you are able to activate the enduring story in the first place, but other than that, it's not really doing anything super novel, which is why it's number 10. Number 9, Mirkwood Pathmaker. Mirkwood Pathmaker is a 3-mana green star elf ranger. Mirkwood Pathmaker's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. This is an effect we've seen a number of times before, but this is the first version of it at 3 mana. Now, because they scale by the number of lands you control, it's not necessarily that big of a deal if you have to pay a little extra for this effect, but it is notable if you're playing them in the late game because it's not going to cost your entire turn to do so. I imagine in Pauper Commander, you probably prefer to run Old Man Willow instead of Mirkwood Pathmakers. They cost 1 more mana, but they have the upside of giving you access to black mana, and they have a second ability that lets them shrink an opposing creature. In Clover, however, this feels like maybe the best Clover to go into an Old Man Willow deck, because you can run actually both of them in that format. Either way, I always do find that it is notable to mention these mono-colored, cheaper variants of a dual-colored commander. While having access to 2 colors is usually an upside in most situations, being in 1 color sometimes means you don't have to, especially if you want to be getting them down early in the game and don't want to have to worry about the hassle of managing 2 colors of mana. Number 8, Fearsome Goblin Pair. Fearsome Goblin Pair is a 3-mana red and black hybrid 1/1 goblin soldier. When this creature dies, amass goblins 4. Amass is a returning mechanic to the set where when you amass, you put that many +1/+1 counters on an army you control. If you don't control an army, you instead create a 0/0 and then put the +1/+1 counters on it. In this way, it's sort of a token creation mechanic, but if you already have the token, it just makes the token bigger. A 3-mana creature that when it dies makes a 4/4 is incredibly strong, and I think it is probably better if it was actually making a 4/4 and not amassing. However, it does add some weird fringe upside. Because you put it on an army you control, and army is a creature type, this can start to stack counters up incredibly quickly on everyone's favorite outcast, the unblockable 1-cost Changeling Outcast. I expect to see this card in every Fearsome Goblin Pair deck. It's just really cool. But going full changelings could be really fun, I think, where you can actually start spreading out those counters and not just stacking them all on one creature that might get killed or just chump blocked. Either way, I think they have a lot of potential. Since we're in black, we can loop this creature through the graveyard with Feign Death effects. Easier in Pauper Commander than in Clover, just due to the access of those cards at common instead of uncommon, but either way, it is certainly doable. Number 7, Biffer. Biffer? Bifer? Biffer? Beefer? Biffer? Biffer. Biffer? Biffer. Probably Biffer? Number 7, Biffer, Melodic Rider. Biffer is a 6 mana, red and white hybrid 4/5 dwarf bard. They have storied, and when Biffer enters or attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. As long as you have an enduring story, if an ability of a dwarf you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Once again, storied means that if you control 3 or more artifacts, legendaries, and or sagas, you gain the enduring story for the rest of the game. Biffer is expensive. 6 mana is a lot to get down, but you can play them on a board that already has the requirements to be storied, and on a board with dwarves that have triggered abilities that can start going off immediately that turn. You don't have to untap with them. They also start handing out those +1/+1 counters as soon as they enter, and then continue to when they attack. If you play them without the requirements to earn an enduring story, they're just handing out a single counter. But if you do have the enduring story, they get to hand out 2 right away because it doesn't say an ability of another dwarf you control. Handing out 2 +1/+1 counters on enters and every time they attack is really strong just on its own. If you don't have any other dwarves, I think this card is still quite good. But that's the floor. The ceiling is that you run all of the really cool dwarves that have really cool triggered abilities. There's not a ton of dwarves that have triggered abilities, but there's enough that you can certainly sprinkle in your favorites if you don't want to go full dwarf kindred on this. Either direction, I think they're going to add a lot of value to the table really quickly, letting them come down, pop off, and help you close out a game. Number 6, Bilbo, Luckwearer. Bilbo Luckwearer is a 2 mana blue 1/1 halfling rogue. They have the adventure of Burglar's Plot for 5 mana, sorcery, exchange control of 2 target non-land permanents that share a card type, and their own abilities of Bilbo can't be blocked, and whenever Bilbo deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. This one's interesting because the adventure is more expensive than the creature. How adventures work, if you aren't aware, is that you may cast this spell as the adventure, and if you do, it exiles itself as it resolves, and you may cast the creature half later. As funny as Burglar's Plot is, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to make some pretty cool decks with it, that's not why I think this card deserves the number 6 slot. This card's number 6 just because a 2 mana 1/1 that can't be blocked, that draws a card whenever it hits, is very strong. Yes, it's only looting, it's drawing then discarding, not just drawing, but that's still a lot of card selection right at the beginning of the game when it matters the most. As far as I can tell, there's nothing that's as efficient as Bilbo when it comes to being a creature that loots on combat damage, especially when you add in that they can't be blocked, making it so you're guaranteed to get that trigger. Number 5, Snowslope Hunter. Snowslope Hunter is a 3 mana red 2/3 Goblin Ranger. They have the ability, sacrifice another creature or artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your next turn. Activate only during your turn and only once each turn. So this isn't a true free sack outlet since it needs to be done on your turn and you can only do it once per turn. But it's an incredibly consistent way of repeatedly impulse drawing, that's exiling cards to be able to temporarily play them. And on top of that, it doesn't cost any additional mana. So often impulse draw effects don't work for me because I've spent all of my mana impulse drawing and then I can't cast the spell that I should now have access to. On top of that, even if you can't cast the spell, you can play them until the end of your next turn. It's kind of incredible when you compare it to most other impulse draw effects. As far as what kind of decks does this actually push you into, it doesn't really function that much as a build around. You might be able to get some value out of casting from exile, but for the most part, this is just a value commander that's going to make the rest of your deck function really well. Number 4, the Chief Warg. The Chief Warg is a 4 mana black and green 3/3 wolf. It has menace, and whenever you attack while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card and lose a life. Once again, this is just a very reliable draw engine. Those just tend to win games even if they're not super flashy. Having access to 2 colors is good, being a 3/3 menace is good, and the condition to draw the card isn't much of a hoop to jump through, especially when they just need a single pump to satisfy the condition themselves. Number 3, Elven Raftsteerer. Elven Raftsteerer is a 3 mana blue 3/2 elf pilot. They have landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, choose 1. Tap target creature an opponent controls, or untap target creature you control. This is incredibly similar to Retreat to Coralhelm. Now that card's an enchantment and lets you scry. So in Pauper Commander, it can't even be the commander, which makes this really interesting and novel. In Clover, you could have had Retreat to Coralhelm as your Clover, so it's less impactful, although I still think it has some upsides compared to the enchantment, but most decks would rather make Retreat to Coralhelm their Clover. Either way, what do you do with this? And I've tinkered around with it a little bit myself. Mostly, you want to be untapping other untappers. See, Elven Raphsteer only untaps target creature you control, not target permanent. But if you have something like a Vizier of Tumbling Sands, you can untap that, and then it can untap any permanent you control, which includes your lands, which means at bare minimum, you can have Elven Raphsteer generate you an additional mana whenever you get landfall, making it effectively a Lotus Cobra, which is, I mean, I would run Lotus Cobra as my commander if I could. It also lets you do a bunch of other cute shenanigans. If you have a Walking Atlas in Pauper Commander or a Poo Poo UFO in Clover, those combined with a bounce land just go infinite. Although now I'm looking and Pauper Commander does not have access to bounce lands in mono blue, so you're going to have to get creative when it comes to that one. Still, though, being able to untap a Walking Atlas and just dump every land in your hand is pretty strong. And you could probably even combine it with some Moonfolk to do some Gretchen Titchwillow-esque stuff. That deck's still going to be stronger, but she's CPDH viable, so it's not much of a comparison. Anyway, I do think Elven Raphsteer is really cool, opens up a lot of interesting options, and just gives you a good space to brew around that's creative while also being powerful. Number 2, Gloin the Mighty. Gloin the Mighty is a 4-mana red 4/3 dwarf warrior. They have the adventure, easy pickings, 3 mana for a sorcery. Easy pickings deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Gloin's ability is at the beginning of your first main phase, add red. This is just so generically good. Whereas the other one I think pushes you in a lot of interesting creative directions, this one's just strong. Being able to hang everybody's board on turn 3, resetting the board of all X1s, and then immediately curving into playing them on turn 4 is just so good. They then just go on to give you an extra 2 mana every turn they stick around. That's just such a huge boost of mana for a mono red deck to have, reliably and consistently and repeatably. Once again, it does not push you in an interesting new direction. It's just really good, and I think it's just the de facto generic red commander. If you want to be in mono red and don't have any other thoughts about a commander that specifically synergizes with your game plan, just run Gloin. It's always going to be good. It's always going to be good. Before I move on to my number 1, I have 2 honorable mentions I'd like to shout out. First is Troop of Ponies. This card should not be your commander in Pauper Commander, and it can't be your lucky Clover in Clover, but I think it's just a really important uncommon creature to know about. Troop of Ponies is a 2-mana, colorless, 2/1 horse. They have 2 tap, sacrifice this creature, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand, then shuffle. This is just an incredibly reliable ramp spell for non-green decks that don't have other options. It's being compared a lot to Burnished Heart, which is a 3-mana colorless 2/2 that can be sacrificed for an additional 3 mana, where you get to search your library for 2 basic lands and put them both onto the battlefield tapped. I like this so much better for a bunch of reasons. First of all, it's giving you the same amount of lands. Yes, it's only ramping you 1, but if you missed your land drop, then it's basically the same. In fact, it's even kind of better because 1 land is entering tapped and 1 is being played, which makes it enter untapped. Additionally, just coming down a turn earlier and spending my turn 2 on Troop of Ponies and then spending almost all of my turn 3 to get the ramp is so much better than playing Burnished Heart on turn 3 and then losing all but 1 mana on turn 4 to ramp. The upside that Burnished Heart has is that it doesn't need to tap, which means if you have 6 mana, you can just play the whole thing in 1 turn if you're in a late game grindy stall out situation. Either way, I think it's a very strong card, it's just not super relevant to this video. My other honorable mention is Thorin Oakenshield. Thorin Oakenshield is a 2-mana red and white 3/2 dwarf noble. They have trample and storied, and as long as you have an enduring story, artifacts and creatures you control have ward 1. This is strong, but it doesn't really do a ton. It protects your board, but only kind of. If you want to do some like cheeky combo thing and have people not interact with you, people are still going to interact with you. they have to. They're going to pay the ward if it means stopping you from winning the game. So I just don't really see a huge benefit here. It's very similar to Dane, where it's just kind of an annoyance as opposed to an actual prevention of anything. But I do think that Dane is going to be better at stalling the game to give you time to set up than Thorin's actually going to do to protect your board once it's set up. And with all that said, my number one pick for the top uncommon creatures from The Hobbit is Thranduil, Sindarin Liege. Thranduil is a 4-mana, green and blue, hybrid 2/3 elf noble. They have an adventure of Sylvan Rally for 3 mana, a sorcery that says mill 4 cards, then put up to 2 land cards from among them into your hand. Additionally, their only ability is other elves you control get +1/+1, and landfall, whenever a land you control enters, create a 1/1 green elf creature token. Once again, like Gloin, they curve perfectly from their 3-mana adventure side to their 4-mana creature side. Once they're down, they have one of the most incredible landfall effects I've ever seen. Making a 1/1 on landfall is already incredibly strong, but it's an elf creature token, so it benefits from Thranduil's own ability, making them effectively always 2/2s. They're green and blue, so you have access to the colors that you really want as an elf-focused landfall deck, but they're also hybrid, so if you really wanted to, you could go completely mono-green with them for the consistency. That said, you're likely ramping, so I don't think consistency is going to be an issue if you do want to splash into blue. Landfall is already such a strong and supported archetype, and while Tatyova is still likely the best landfall commander, Thranduil not only supports landfall, but also elf as an archetype, which is arguably just as strong. Putting them together is just such a strong pairing that there is no doubt in my mind that Thranduil is the number one uncommon creature from The Hobbit. Have a good night, everyone. I've been Darcy Bits. I hope you enjoy this shift to a more inclusive review. If you have any comments or feedback, it is something that I think is an important shift to make, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Regardless, have a good night, and I'll see you next time.